So Hare Krishna would like to welcome all of our viewers to today's session hosted by the ISKCON's Ministry for Education. And today with us, we have some of our most illustrious leaders from the ISKCON UK Yatra, who have kindly agreed to come and share their time and share their thoughts and reflections and inspirations on the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books and how we can encourage all of the devotees within our circles of influence, if you like, to do the same and benefit themselves in this wonderful way. Before I continue, I'd just like to introduce our speakers who need no introduction, but we will appreciate them in that way. Firstly, we'd like to introduce our Zonal Secretary, GBC Zonal Secretary for the UK, His Grace Praghosa Prabhu. Praghosa Prabhu, many of you may be familiar with, joined the movement in the early 80s. He was a pioneer in Ireland, opening up restaurants, preaching centers, and he's been involved with the GBC for over 2 decades, I believe, and continues to do so in many very, very key ways. He's known for his humor, his lightheartedness, and I'm sure we'll experience some of that on today's call. So thank you, Praghosa Prabhu, so much for coming.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Sutapa.
And on my right-hand side, I don't know how it appears on your screen, but we have our very dear Jai Nitai Prabhu, who I believe was a talented guitarist and a musician, and who joined ISKCON in our London branch in the late 90s, and went on to take on the very, let me say, difficult, but I'm sure rewarding and roller coaster journey of being the temple president at ISKCON London, and he did a marvelous job, and he's just come to the conclusion of his tenure as the temple president in London after 15 years of service, nearly 15 years of service. Jai Nitai Prabhu continues to function there and inspire the congregation, and one of his key focal areas at the moment is devotee care, and he serves on the global GBC committee to try to further that very important part of our movement. So thank you so much, Jai Nitai Prabhu, for being with us today. And last but not least, we have Caitanya Vallabh Prabhu, who I didn't know this, but who studied ancient history and archaeology at Liverpool University. Clearly became disillusioned with modern scientific explanations of our origins. He met the devotees in September 2000 and joined ISKCON Scotland, Karuna Bhavan, and became a full-time book distributor, not just a full-time book distributor, but perhaps one of the best book distributors the UK has ever seen. A brahmachari leader, a bhakta leader, and lived as a brahmachari for 13 years and now is based in ISKCON Newcastle. He's the temple president in ISKCON Newcastle and serves on the UK Management Council Committee. So thank you so much, Caitanya Vallabh, for coming today. So just to frame our discussion, just to kind of give it some background, I was reflecting the other day of how Srila Prabhupada had said, my disease is that I never think small, I'm always thinking big. And Prabhupada had many, many big projects on his mind. But perhaps I was reflecting, and maybe the illustrious devotees here can maybe challenge me on this, but my understanding or my feeling is that perhaps of all the projects that Srila Prabhupada initiated in his lifetime, perhaps his project of translating the Srimad Bhagavatam was perhaps his biggest project. This was one of my reflections. It was a project which he perhaps spent the most amount of time on in his years. It was the project in which he dedicated perhaps the most valuable time of the day practically every single day, the early morning hours. His project of translating the Bhagavatam was something he worked on from the very beginning of his mission until the very final days of his mission, right there in Vrindavan, translating the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. The translation of Srimad Bhagavatam and that mission was something that Srila Prabhupada integrated into every other program. Srila Prabhupada wanted every program to be a program in which books were distributed, books were taught, and knowledge was disseminated. And it's interesting that only when Srila Prabhupada translated the Bhagavatam first canto did he really feel he had the ammunition, the spiritual ammunition in order to come to the West. So really such a huge project Srila Prabhupada had, and something in which he invested so much time. He said, the best of me is in my books. And the question then goes on the table as to how much all of us, the devotees of ISKCON, are taking advantage of that beautiful gift that Srila Prabhupada's given, and what we can do to reciprocate with his incredible kindness and effort in translating the Bhagavatam. And so today, I'm going to kind of kick off the conversation, and I would like each of you to feel free to kind of reflect upon each other's comments. But I guess the starting point I'd like to take for this discussion is, as leaders within the community, from your general observation of the devotees that you observe within the communities you're in contact with, what are your feelings on the general situation of devotees reading Srila Prabhupada's books? Do you think it's a healthy situation? Do you see generally that it's something we're deficient in? Of course, there will be fluctuation, but your general feeling. And also along with that, with regards to reading Srila Prabhupada's books and studying the literature, what do you feel the trajectory that we're on looks like? Is it improving? Is it pretty stagnant? Is it declining? I'd just like to get a sense of your feelings from what you've observed in your different yatras. And I guess the most natural place to start is the top. So we will ask Praghosa Prabhu as our GBC secretary to maybe reflect upon his observations to kind of kick us off on this discussion. Praghosa Prabhu, if you just unmute, yeah.
Sorry. I was just saying thanks for that introduction and indeed those questions. That they're thought-provoking and very interesting. If I veer off, by the way, jump in as the facilitator and let me know I'm going off track here, because it's a very, very interesting question and quite broad. I think for me, myself personally, the differences I've experienced over the last, whatever it is, nearly 4 decades, I guess, is that and by the way, let me first say that the first book I ever read of Srila Prabhupada's was The Science of Self-Realization, which I think is actually quite common for many devotees, certainly of my generation, which is quite old. There was 2 sentences that I read where Srila Prabhupada said, so we have to understand that we are not these bodies, and we also have to understand that we're not the mind. And for me, it was just like a penny dropping. It was like ka-chung, bang, wow, what a statement. I think it was something to do with my suffering on the mental platform at that time, which I won't go into. You might have to cut the tape because it will probably be quite X-rated. But suffering on the mental platform, and then to read that, it was so liberating, to read that actually I'm nothing to do with this crazy mind. So from that point of view, or from my point of view, then, the importance of Srila Prabhupada's books was paramount. I did then go through a period, I'm not sure exactly, maybe 5 years after joining, something like that, where my reading really waned, a combination of things in relation to so many other important things that need to be done. The other thing that I'm sure a lot of devotees, and I've actually reversed this now in my life now, But that experience of as soon as you pick up a book, you're sleeping within the first 2-3 sentences of reading. It's, you know, it's just like, who needs sleeping pills? You know, when you're reading, anyway, reading Srila Prabhupada's books. That sounds almost offensive to Srila Prabhupada, but that was an experience. And actually, the thing that I've changed is that my times of reading now are either really early, you know, when you first get up. Or after you've had a nap sometime in the day. That's the time I usually now read, because I'm at my brightest in that sense and less likely to fall asleep. But anyway, so I'm not sure, 5 years or something after, I went through a period of where I just almost gave up reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And after some time, not sure how long it was, I began to realize that, you know, I'm really missing something. Actually, you're kind of going on adrenaline, you're going on, you know, just on momentum in your service. And this phrase came to my mind, you know, just as when I first read the Science of Self-Realization, the realization I got from reading that book was just extraordinary. So I came up with this comment, the mantra in my mind saying, you've got to read for realization. Realization is an ongoing process, and that you're ever, you know, increasing your realizations and deepening your realizations. And given my experience of reading first, that gave me such an incredible realization. I kind of had that mantra in my head: you've got to read for realization. And that kind of started me again, you know, delving more deeply into Srila Prabhupada's books. But specific to your questions, and then I'll let the others contribute. Specific to your questions, I think on one level, when I first joined the movement, reading was part of your daily sadhana. And it was really given as much importance as chanting your rounds. It was kind of like, if you didn't read for an hour a day was basically what we were expected to do. And you really felt if you didn't do that, you somehow or another weren't completing your sadhana. So in that sense, I think years ago, I think reading was more endemic for all devotees. Now what I think tends to happen is those devotees who do read, not exclusively, but I think primarily my experience is they really do read and study Srila Prabhupada's books and really are always mining them to extract more from them. But then there's another cohort of devotees who maybe don't read at all. Whereas in the early days, everybody read, but maybe the quality of the reading wasn't necessarily as good as it is today. But I think today, while the quality may have increased, it's not everybody that engages in that process. So I think that answers your first question. I know we have other follow-on questions, but that would be, the trajectory, just to finish on the trajectory. I think the trajectory is actually very good for those devotees who identify the importance of reading. But I think it kind of flatlines with those devotees who have yet caught the bug. And I think that's our challenge as leaders, to get everybody to catch the bug of reading Srila Prabhupada's books.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Praghosa. And I'm just going to pick up on one of the points you've made, and perhaps Jai Nitai and Caitanya Vallabh can also hone in on this. You mentioned about how reading was so much a part of a devotee's life. It was almost like programmed in you mentioned the earlier days. And I'm wondering if that's something to do with devotees living in ashrams or devotees living as full-time devotees, to later on in our movement making a transition into living as congregation members. And I think Jai Nitai and Caitanya Vallabh are good devotees to speak about that. They both spent a good amount of time in the ashram and are now both happily married. And it would be good to know, maybe you could both factor that into your response as well, of what your experiences were in terms of reading whilst living as a temple devotee and then as a congregation. But please, Jai Nitai, if you can share some thoughts with us on your observations.
Yeah, thanks. And I think there are a couple of things to pick up on what Praghosa said, but on your point, I would agree 100%. I think having had the wonderful opportunity of living as a brahmachari in the ashram for 10 years, from the time that I joined, and of course, when I joined, it was also because of Srila Prabhupada's, I got Srila Prabhupada's books many years ago. It wasn't exactly why I joined. But once I had the opportunity to start reading daily, I was also doing that as part of my morning sadhana. As soon as I finished chanting my rounds, I was getting at least an hour a day in, and then we would read when we go on book distribution and things like that. But my experience as I interacted with many of our community members was that they didn't really have the same emphasis on it, and they weren't placing it as such a powerful priority in their lives. And I could see that a lot of people really weren't reading Srila Prabhupada's books. They would listen a lot to lectures, or they were listening to kirtan, or they would listen to classes. But the actual opening up of a book, or even reading electronically, which was kind of starting to happen, wasn't really happening. So I would say that there's definitely a difference between someone who maybe comes in and gets an opportunity in the ashram to really take it full on serious, and then also the gap between our community and our residents, and how to bridge that gap and inspire people more. I also think with what Praghosa said, that as I started to take on more managerial responsibilities, my reading also went down, which really it should have gone up and doubled in order for me to deal with things. But I was reminded of one long-standing honorable temple president, I won't mention a name, when I spoke to him once. He said that he hadn't read one of Srila Prabhupada's books in probably like 20 years. But he said he's at the full morning program every day and never misses a Bhagavatam class. And he's in really good standing and a very strong personality. So I think there's something to be said in that. But at the same time, for me, I feel it. If I don't read Prabhupada's books for a couple of days, I can feel that I'm not really firing on all cylinders, because my actual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, evam bude param budva, is not really strong, and therefore I don't really think I'm doing the best service to my service. So that would be it. But I think also the trajectory, I kind of saw it from a different perspective of what Praghosa maybe described, but I think the trajectory is that things are improving. I think with persons, especially like Vaisheshika Prabhu, Keshav Bharati Maharaj, also ever since they did that survey at the ILS, I think it was about four or 5 years ago now, where they realized that amongst the leaders, only hardly any of them had even finished reading the Bhagavatam from first canto to 12th canto, that all of a sudden there started to be a big push on this point of, hey, we're really missing something here. And maybe back in the day, way back before they even had books, when Praghosa Prabhu joined, I mean, they were writing on palm leaves. No, sorry. That was. But I think that then, as people were coming in, it really was, and also maybe the community wasn't as big. It was like more people probably came straight to the temple and lived in the temple. But now it's like so many people join, and it's a bit diverse. So anyway, I'll let Caitanya Vallabh speak.
Thank you, Jai Nitai. Yeah, you raised some important points about leaders and reading, and I'm going to come back to that. Caitanya Vallabh, your community, I'm guessing, is in the region of 100 and 150 devotees who are kind of within that circle. Would that be fair?
Yeah, something like that. If everyone was to come all at once, but I would say coming regularly, more like, 50 or something like that. If it's a big festival, Janmastami, you'll get more like, 100 or something. But generally coming regularly, more like 50 or something.
So I'm going to kind of put you a little bit on the spot here, and I hope none of them feel like you're going to judge them or you're casting any aspersions on it. But from your observation as the leader of that community, would you say you're satisfied and content with the level of reading going on in your congregation, or do you feel it really needs an improvement?
I would say, yes, I think there's definitely room for improvement. Vaisheshika Prabhu was mentioned there. One of his mottos is ABS, always better service. So definitely there's room for improvement. And I think one of the reasons is as you were asking, is there a difference between living in the ashram and then not living in the ashram? So my experience was that actually I love reading. Whether even before reading Srila Prabhupada's books, I like reading books. So when I came across Srila Prabhupada's books, I loved reading them. So for me, it was never really much, I didn't require much encouragement to read. Actually, I had a slightly different experience, which I first read one of Srila Prabhupada's books when I was at university. And for the first 6 months, I hadn't met devotees, but I got many books from a secondhand bookshop. So in those 6 months, I was already following the 4 regulative principles, offering my food to Krishna, and starting to try and chant Hare Krishna. I hadn't even met devotees, but just from reading Prabhupada's books, I became a devotee. And I was really enjoying reading the books. But then when I joined the temple, our temple at that time, the modus operandi was very much not reading the books, but distributing the books. So I read more books before I joined than I did then when I joined. and we were chanting 25 rounds a day. So you could say, well, okay, when you get to the end of your 16 rounds, that's the time for reading. But when you're chanting 25 rounds a day, plus doing a full day of book distribution, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, I used to joke, say there's not even time to clip my toenails. You felt like you were in Maya just if you were going to have a shave or something. So there was so much emphasis put on distributing the books, but not so much reading. Now, yes, we were, you had to go to the full morning program. Even if you were going to leave the temple room, you had to let someone know you were going to go to the toilet. You had to put your hand up and ask one of the senior devotees if you could leave to go to the toilet, because you might have been just going off to space out. So it was a really regimental, Prabhupada uses a lot of military rhetoric in his books. And it was very much like a military base, Karuna Bhavan back in those times. So for myself, actually, I didn't have much time to read the books. But I used to try and fit in as much as you just try and squeeze it in where you could. And sometimes I would find, and sometimes I'd feel like I was in Maya, because I would drop the devotees off on Sankirtan, park up the car, tape shot, and then I would go and join. And sometimes I would read for 10 minutes before I was leaving the car. And I kind of felt a bit like I was being a bit independent, I wasn't following the party line. But the point was, in those 10 minutes, because you were really trying to I'll just clarify this one point. Because we were going out on Sankirtan every day of the year, and I was one of these persons, and I still am, that it's really hard to start a day of Sankirtan, but at the end of the day, it's very hard to stop, because you get the taste, you get the inspiration, but to go out to start with, it's like, oh God, And I joined the temple and ISKCON knowing that that was what it meant. For me to practice Krishna consciousness meant going out every day on book distribution for the rest of my life and going back to Godhead. That's what I'd joined. That's what I'd signed up for. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't easy. So when I was chanting Hare Krishna every morning, I was chanting please, Krishna, just help me. I've got to go out on Sankirtan. Just give me some inspiration. Give me some strength. Give me some courage. And so therefore, I always say that chanting Hare Krishna, it's not an activity, it's a lifestyle. And the lifestyle is constantly trying to surrender to Krishna at every moment. So I also feel that for me, reading is not an activity, it's a lifestyle. And every time I was reading Prabhupada's books, I was looking for one sentence, something that was going to inspire me to surrender, to go out on Sankirtan that day. And I still remember things that I read in Prabhupada's books when I very first joined the temple 21 years ago. I remembered reading in 1866, Prabhupada describes in the purport that Masuchaha means do not hesitate, do not worry, do not fear, do not worry. So the translation is just, do not fear. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender to me, do not fear. But Prabhupada says in the purport, Masuchaha means do not fear, do not hesitate, do not worry. So that was something I remembered. And when I was going out on Sankirtan, that was a meditation that was do not fear, do not hesitate, do not worry. Just get out the car, just start approaching people. Don't fear, don't hesitate, don't worry. So that's just an example of something I read, in just maybe 5 minutes before I went out on Sankirtan. But I remember it 21 years later. And it was a meditation. So for me, reading Prabhupada's books was a matter of life and death. Because it was if I'm going out into the lion's den here, if I don't find something inspirational in Prabhupada's books in the next 5 minutes, I might die. I might just end up not doing any Sankirtan and just, going into W.H. Smith's all day or whatever it was, or just, spacing out and getting into Maya. So for me, it was chanting Hare Krishna and reading. It's not an activity, it was a lifestyle. But the point I'm trying to make is that for me, it was so necessary to read Prabhupada's books because I needed to find something inspirational to encourage me to surrender, to chant Hare Krishna, and to do my service. And I think one thing is that having moved out of the ashram, I think that urgency is not there in quite the same way for me. So before, it used to be that chanting Hare Krishna, I had to really chant with a mood of urgency. Please help me, please surrender, help me to surrender, please inspire me. And the same with my reading. And I think you can get into a bit more of a comfort zone. And although I'm still going out and distributing books, it's not quite with the same, like, oh, Krishna, please help me. I'm, because I kind of think, oh, I can do this now. I know what I'm doing. So therefore, because I think I like reading, I think sometimes I may have been a bit neglectful to think, yeah, everyone likes reading. Everyone likes reading Prabhupada's books because I'm into it, so everyone else must be into it. But I think I would definitely say it's my observation that everyone definitely isn't into it. My members of my own family, when I've tried to encourage them to read, they're not so enthusiastic as me. But one thing I would say is that when we have, like Jai Nitai Prabhu mentioned, Vaisheshika, when you have a leader who's really into something. I mean, I was listening to Vaisheshika Prabhu today, just before this, just to get some inspiration. And every time I listen to him, it's just like, I just feel completely transformed, even if he hasn't said anything, just his whole countenance and his presence. And that's just coming online. I just feel like, so if we have devotees who are into it, but also understand the fact that they want to get others into it, they're not being selfish, that it's just about, right, what can I get from this? It's like, no, share it with others. So I think, and we've had experience that when we do come together as a community, in the temple, but especially outside of the temple, when we have house programs, if we have a house program, there's a tendency sometimes to just have prasadam and kirtan, which is nice. But Prabhupada one time said, and sorry, I'm going to try and wrap this up a little bit. Prabhupada one time, there was a boy that was coming on a morning walk every morning with Prabhupada in India. And he wanted to join. And the devotee said, oh, Prabhupada, this boy wants to join. and Prabhupada asked this boy, he said, so, have you read our books? And then the boy said, no. And Prabhupada said, so, do not join. First, you must go away and study our books and understand our philosophy. Then you can come and join. And actually, this boy never came back again and he didn't join. And when Prabhupada was asked about it, Prabhupada said, yes. He said, if they join on sentiment, they will leave on sentiment. and what I see that within ISKCON and in our community, and I would imagine, the wider community, is that there are a lot of people who get caught up in the sentiment that prasadam's great, kirtan's great, it's nice being with the devotees, it's nice listening to a class or this or that. But ultimately, if we're going to try and maintain our vows in Krishna consciousness, they have to be based upon something more than just enjoying the kirtan and, enjoying a nice pakora or whatever it is. Actually, it really has to be based upon the philosophy which we get from Srila Prabhupada's books. So yes, I think there's room for improvement. I think that's partly because I just think everyone's into it like I am. And I see there's a need within myself to try and share that more with the devotees like Vaisheshika Prabhu is doing.
Wonderful, yeah. I'm going to pick up now on this point, as I had my plan of how this discussion would go, and it's all out of the window at the moment, but that's great.
Sorry.
you mentioned something about a leader has to be into it, a leader has to be inspired, a leader has to love reading Prabhupada's books, otherwise it will be very difficult to instill that or inspire others to do that. Praghosa Prabhu talked about devotees catching the bug, and then it becomes automatic. And normally we go to a doctor when we've caught the bug and say, why have I caught the bug? But what I'm going to do is come to all of you today as spiritual doctors and ask you, I haven't caught the bug. I don't. I've been in the movement for 10 years, for 15 years. I hear it all the time that I should read Prabhupada's books, but I haven't caught the bug. I don't feel the inspiration. Vaisheshika Prabhu is, beaming, but I don't feel the same thing. Why is it? Why is it that I haven't caught the bug? I just opened that out to you. And whoever's watching, leaders that are watching, you can maybe take note of this, because these will then give you the keys as to know what to address in your community so that devotees can catch the bug. But if I haven't caught the bug, if I don't feel the inspiration, if I'm not feeling inspired reading Srila Prabhupada's books, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, great question. And great listening to both Jai Nitai and Caitanya Prabhu's. Very nice, very inspiring. I do have to pick Caitanya up, though, on the point about, I think he gave the army a bad name when he made the equation between that and, you know, asking to go to the loo. I'm not sure you can do that in the army, you know. And we won't go any further on that discussion. That's a whole Leela. But listening to both of you speak, all of you speak, it is extremely interesting. At the very beginning, by the way, just on something that I think Jai Nitai said about congregations, it came up, because I completely agree that the idea of the ashram, it's just the conducive environment. You mentioned at the beginning, Sutapa Prabhu, about Prabhupada dedicating the kind of most important hours of the day, early morning, to translating books. So when you're in the ashram, you're in an environment that I think is more conducive, if you like, to reading. But as you say, from ashram to becoming a congregational member, at least then you have the ashram training. I think one of the big challenges for us in ISKCON going forward is that I think more and more of our devotees now, they never live in an ashram. They start as congregational members and they continue that way. I think that's also a big challenge for us, not just in terms of reading Prabhupada's books, i.e. Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, etc., but also reading about Prabhupada. Reading his conversations, reading his correspondence, because then you really imbibe what this was all about. And I think if you're devoid of that and you don't have that context, you know, it becomes a little incomplete, I think, because you want to understand the whole thing. And then in relation to what you said about Srila Prabhupada, was it his most important, most crucial thing that he did? And when you analyze what Srila Prabhupada did, you know, from translating all these incredible texts from Vedic literature, you know, to opening temples, opening gurukuls, and even, you know, he was the first person to open a chain of vegetarian restaurants on the planet. You know, Prabhupada's things that he did are so extraordinary and so vast. It's actually inconceivable that he was able to actually do everything. But specific as it relates to your point about was it his most important project, and also catching the bug and how to try and inspire others, as is being presented by the other devotees too. I came across this verse from the Padma Purana during the 50th anniversary, Idam stanam pradityaja videsham gamyate maya. And basically it's a prediction from Bhakti Devi to Narada Muni, saying that, and this obviously was thousands and thousands of years ago, that I will leave this place, Vrindavan, and go to faraway lands to preach the glories of Bhagavatam. Now, the word Bhagavatam is in that verse, which is really interesting, because when Prabhupada left India for America, he just brought with him a few incidental things, you know, like a change of clothes and you know, some granola and an umbrella, different bits and pieces. But the one thing of real significance that he brought with him was a trunks of Srimad Bhagavatam, trunks of books. That was the thing that he actually, of real substance, that he brought with him. And then, of course, when he came to the West, once he established his first temple or center in 26 2nd Avenue, he started the morning program. And of course, a key part of the morning program is the Srimad Bhagavatam class. That's a key part of it. So we can see right from the very outset, you know, before Prabhupada even started ISKCON, that his focus on books was so important and was predicted thousands of years ago also in terms of the preaching the glories of Bhagavatam. And then Prabhupada himself, when he was reading his own books, I mean, this is another thing I just find completely extraordinary. He's reading his own books and then he stops, turns to whichever devotee or devotees are present and says, I didn't write these. You know, I mean, how incredible is this? Predictions from thousands of years ago about the preaching Bhagavatam, taking it to the West, Prabhupada going there, bringing Bhagavatams with him, then telling us he's not writing these purports. you know, I mean, in one sense, you could say it's an expression of humility from Prabhupada. But my understanding of that pastime, and I think he mentioned that more than once. It wasn't a one-off. My understanding of those exchanges and those references from Prabhupada is they're completely genuine. So therefore, if we want to be inspired, yes, they're Prabhupada's books, and we call them the Bhaktivedanta purports, and of course, Prabhupada did physically, in that sense, write them. But they are just so much directly inspired by Krishna himself, coming directly from Krishna. And we can just look at Prabhupada and see what an extraordinary personality, that he was predicted to do this, and that Krishna chose him to write these incredible purports. So in terms of catching the bug, I would say, by the way, just to add, I suppose to kind of counterbalance, that one, people have different natures. And Caitanya was just saying that he was an avid reader. You know, you just know many people who are just not avid readers. So it's going to be a little harder to get those kind of personalities to catch the bug, because it's just not so much in their nature to sit and read. But then we have, of course, the examples from Shastra, you know, of that devotee. He's just looking at the pictures and he's crying when he sees Arjuna, you know, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, etc. So, of course, we have to also be careful, one, that we don't, you know, sort of try to overly impose. It has to come from inspiration, I think. And the other thing I would say, and that's why I really like the word inspiration, and it's been mentioned in relation to Vaisheshika Prabhu and obviously in relation to Srila Prabhupada, etc. I think that word inspiration is very, very, very important, because we also don't want to become an academic institution that we're just becoming academically qualified in terms of we know all the stories and pastimes, we know all the verses, etc., but there's no realization that we're taking from them, or little realization that we're taking from them. So yeah, I can't remember what your question was now.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, what I've done here is I've tried to ask a very specific question. I didn't ask, and this is not reflecting on your response, but I purposely didn't ask the question, what can I do to catch the bug? I kind of came from it from a different angle of, because I feel devotees sometimes they're convinced, they hear about the importance, they know the importance, but they're just not able to break through and really make that connection. You said that many may not be readers. And therefore, I just asked that very specific question, that is there anything I may be missing? Is there something I'm doing wrong? Is there something in my own approach to Srila Prabhupada's books that may be stopping me from really making this connection? So I was just asking for all of any responses on that, because I do come across a lot of devotees who feel that. And then just giving them more and more quotes about why they should do it and how inspired everyone else is about doing it. It may just, it can also be counterproductive, because they feel even more away from where they want to be.
Just one thing quickly, and I know I spoke just now, so I'll just be really short with this. I think Caitanya made reference to it also, about going out in Sankirtan, that getting out of the car, that's really challenging. But once you're out there and you've broken that barrier, which is what you're talking about, Sutta Prabhu, is, that's the kind of goal. So, it's about getting taste, isn't it? Taste for reading. And we all know, reading Prabhupada's purports, every other sentence, if not every sentence, God, wow, you really get a wow factor once you delve into the books. So getting them to delve into the books and using carrots or whatever. One thing over the years that I've done, and at least some devotees have come back to say it really helped them, but it is a motivated thing. It's like at festival days, if you announce ahead of time, you're going to have a quiz. So on Gopanim, it's going to be a quiz on Caitanya Leela, Janmashtami, a quiz on Krishna Leela, etc., etc. And you announce it a week or two before, and we're going to have a quiz. What I find is devotees who want to participate in the quiz, they'll actually delve into those pastimes of the relevant festival that we're conducting. And some of them have come back to me, not all, some have come back afterwards and said, I really appreciate that the opportunity for participating, having a quiz, and me participating, and therefore reading up before the quiz questions. I'd be asked the questions, because since I've done that, I've actually got a little taste for reading, and I've actually continued to do so going forward. So, yeah.
Oh, really appreciate that. Yeah, just like we have the transcendental competition for distributing Prabhupada's books, a little bit of transcendental competition for reading. Wonderful. Jai Nitai Prabhu, Caitanya Vallabh Prabhu, I don't know if you'd like to reflect on this. What am I doing wrong? Why haven't I been able to catch the bug?
You're a bad person. You should be banished from ISKCON.
All the books you've written should be discontinued because you haven't got the bug for reading.
Well, I guess the first thing I thought of, and just is, the verse from Nectar of Instruction that explains in the beginning, also with chanting, we have jaundice. It's not that the activity itself is not sweet. It's just that when we enter into it, it's bitter. And I had an experience just this morning. My wife and I, we started doing this thing at the beginning of lockdown last year called Bhagavatam Bites. And we've already read through the Bhagavatam once, and we decided let's do it again. But now let's put it on Facebook and see if we can inspire some devotees to also read. So we've done it. We're in the middle of, we're in the third canto, I think 12th chapter. And we've been doing it for a year and a half now, and it's going really well. We've got quite a number of people who follow us and who comment. They're very inspired by it. People have started picking up the books and started reading. As 100%, it's definitely affected them positively. And now we've started to introduce something instead of just me and her reading together. We've now, when we go and visit people at home, we say, hey, would you like to do a Bhagavatam Bites with us? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. So we sit for 20 minutes and we just read together. We'll read a couple of verses. And after we read, we say reflections, questions, what's there for you? What came out? And it's really positive. But the point I was going to make is this morning I sat down with a devotee. He's kind of becoming more and more serious. He's doing lots of wonderful service, but he doesn't really read the books so much. And he's from Indian background, so he's kind of knowledgeable. But we sat together and read this morning, and you could see he was kind of struggling just to read a lot of the words that Prabhupada mentions, even though he's from India, Patala Loka, Rasatala, all these things. He was like, oh, and then there's a verse inside of the purport, and he was like, oh, I have to read that, and it's like, okay, it's difficult for people to climb into it, but we just tried to make it as accessible as possible and just have fun with it. I mean, one of the things we do with the Bhagavatam Bites is we just take the book and we go to the park. We sit in the park. I mean, we've done readings on paddle boats in the middle of Regent's Park Lake. Whatever we can do, we're going to do something and we're going to have fun, but we're going to take the Bhagavatam with us and we're just going to read and chat together. So I think it's really important because by nature, we're pleasure-seeking creatures. So if we can't have fun, if it becomes just something where I have to be studious and you're not necessarily studious, and I think that's a good point that Praghosa made. And there is a quote from Prabhupada where he says, not all of our devotees will be studious or be interested in reading, so let them go out and distribute books all day. So that's fine. But at the same time, we can't put everybody in the same boat. But if we want to inspire them, then I think first and foremost, then the leaders, they have to themselves be reading. They have to be seen to be reading and getting life, not just reading for the sake of reading. Yeah, I read my 1 hour today and, I got it in. But they're like, again, Vaisheshika Prabhu, he's such an inspiration that we have to, distribute the overflow. So we need to fill ourselves up on it and then be willing to share it with others, and they naturally become inspired. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Jai Nitai Prabhu and Praghosa Prabhu. Yeah, so I was thinking, I've written down a few points here. One is that if I don't have the bug, there was a book written once called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So, okay, and that's kind of touching on what Jai Nitai Prabhu said, we've got jaundice. Okay, I don't really enjoy chanting Hare Krishna most of the time, to be honest, but I've taken a vow that I've got to chant, so I've got to chant, sometimes by the 15th round, I might have, broken through a little bit. But, the point is that it's not a question of, am I into it? But this is what I'm supposed to do. Even like going out and distributing books. I remember one time a devotee said to me, it's not my nature. And I'm like, well, it's no one's nature to go out and distribute books necessarily. But the point is, Srila Prabhupada wants us to do it. So when you go and do it, the inspiration automatically comes. Feel the fear and do it anyway. You just go, Prabhupada would sometimes say, just, like pretend to be enthusiastic and enthusiasm will come like that. So one thing is just do it anyway. But in order to be able to do that, I would say it's important to associate with those who do have it. If you're not into something, just find someone who's really into it. If you're not good at sitting down and chanting your japa, just go and speak to someone who you can see is really absorbed and say, listen, Prabhu or Mataji, I don't, you seem to be so absorbed in reading and you seem to be really into it. I'm just not. What am I doing wrong? And just associate with them, ask them questions, and sit down and do it with them. So that's one thing. Associate with those who do have the bug, and especially find out how they got the bug. I remember some years ago, Yadunandan Swami, he gave some lectures and some seminars on the Caitanya Charitamrita. And what he was actually trying to get across, the point was, he was saying sometimes we're just dependent upon the big Swami is coming to the community, and we're just waiting for the Swami to come or the senior devotee to come to get inspired, to get enthused, right? Which is all right, which is nice. And we do get inspired when senior Vaishnavas come. We just said association is important. Sangat sanjayate karma, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. According to your association, your desires develop accordingly. But the point is, we're getting inspired when the big Swami or senior devotee is coming. But Candramauli Swami was saying, but find out what's inspiring them. How is it that they're able to go to a different community and inspire the community? He said, we shouldn't become dependent on the person, find out what's inspiring them. And he was saying that the inspiration was coming from Caitanya Charitamrita. That was the point of that seminar. So that's the point. Don't become dependent upon others for your inspiration. You find out how you're going to get inspired yourself by asking those who are inspired. So that's one thing. Another thing is, if we don't have the bug, break it down. So Vaisheshika Prabhu, we keep mentioning him, but he is very inspirational and contagious in his enthusiasm. So he's got one app, Be a Sage, page by page. And he broke it down. He broke down all Prabhupada's main books. So if you've only got time to read one page a day, you can go on the app and you can see, well, if I read one page a day of Bhagavad Gita every day, it's going to take me this amount of time to read it. So, even if you can only read 10 minutes a day, you can get so much from it. But the point is being regulated. Like I said, you're not always into chanting your rounds, but, I've taken the vow, I've got to do it. Okay, I may not be actually inspired to read today, but I've taken the vow to read 2 pages every day. Let me just do it as a matter of duty. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And you will probably find, like Prabhupada said, do it, act with enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm will come. Because Yayatamam prapajante tamstataiva bhajamyaham. Krishna says, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So if you're taking a step towards Krishna, is Krishna not going to be pleased? Is Krishna not going to reciprocate? Krishna sees you're making an endeavor, even though it's hard, he's going to reciprocate by giving some taste. So those are some points. But also, just if it's a little thing, Vaisheshika Prabhu was saying this morning, it's like putting a wedge in something. So if you put a little wedge in, it's just tiny to start with, but if you just do like a chapter of the Bhagavad Gita a day or whatever it is, you just wedge that in every day. And then as you get more of a taste for it, you can push that wedge in further and then you get more space. Because again, as Vaisheshika Prabhu says, there's no such thing as no taste. There's no such thing as no time, but no taste. Because we have taste to, sit down and watch Netflix or, to do this or that or whatever it is. We've got taste for many other things. I'm revealing my heart there. That's called a Freudian slip. But the point is that, we've got taste for something, but I don't have time to read. No, we just don't have taste. So put a little wedge in to start with, just do a little bit. So they were 2 points, but the last thing I wanted to say, and I think this is really important, there was maybe more than 2 points. I've written it down as 2. I expanded a little bit, but the point I wanted to make, and this was the point I was making about, for me, chanting Hare Krishna or reading, it's not an activity. We need to make the distinction between it being an activity and a lifestyle. So for me, my experience was that being part of the mission that was what encouraged me. It didn't encourage me to read. As I said, it was a matter of life and death. You know, if I don't read today, I might fall into the lion's den in Maya. So in other words, being part of the mission. Now, when you are part of the mission, you need inspiration. So I really do feel that it's important that, you know, Krishna consciousness isn't just an activity that, yeah, we have to understand that there's two things, two parts of the mission. One, chant Hare Krishna, and two, teach others. Again, Vaisheshika Prabhu says. So in other words, practicing Krishna consciousness ourselves and sharing it with others. It has to be both of those things. That's what Krishna consciousness is. In the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says in one purport that the Yuga Dharma for this age, he doesn't say it's congregational chanting, he said it's propagation of the holy name. So we need to understand that actually Krishna consciousness, as much as a part of it, it's important for me to practice it, it's as important to share it with others. And what happens is, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, preaching brings life. So the thing is, when you're actually preaching and you're engaged in the mission, everything comes to life. So when you read Prabhupada's books, they come to life. You know, you can sit down and read a book, and if you're not going out and doing anything, if you're not sharing Krishna consciousness, and to be honest, the mission just means to share Krishna with others. And whether that just means giving a book to one of your colleagues at work, giving some prasadam to your next door neighbor, that's all part of the mission. But in order to do that, you need to be inspired, and you need to be fearless. Actually, it's fearful to, you know, even just to give, you know, some prasadam to someone sometimes if you're not into it. And then when you're reading Prabhupada's books.
Sorry, Caitanya Prabhu. I'm just going to come in here. These were excellent points, and because our time is running, you can see why we brought all of you onto the panel, because you have so much. And you know, I think what we've done so far is we've churned a lot of good points to encourage the devotees and to help them overcome what blocks they may have. Real gems of wisdom. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. But we've got about 7 minutes left, and I need to do one other important thing on this call, which is there are many leaders watching this call, and their aspiration, their service is to inspire others. And Jai Nitai Prabhu mentioned this, I think Praghosa Prabhu mentioned this, leaders are overloaded. And in the time matrix, they have so many urgent things which are pulling their attention and on the to-do list. And then there are the important things which may not be pulling on them, but which are crucial. And often the inspiration to that, or the need to give the inspiration to read Prabhupada's books is important, but it may not be on the urgent list. And therefore, for leaders, it always tends to be something that they inadvertently focus less on in terms of their leadership and giving that to others. And I'm just wondering whether you can share, because you're all incredibly busy, how do leaders prioritize things like inspiring the devotees to read, which may not be an urgent point on their to-do list, and they may have 108 other fires to fight? How do they do it? How do you do it? How do you ensure that you don't neglect the important parts of leadership which are so crucial to the future? If any of you could just reflect on that.
Are you specifically asking that question in terms of the leaders themselves, you know, giving enough time to reading, or specifically?
No, in terms of, as part of their leadership, there are, 108 fires to fight, which are on the to-do list. And then there's this other point of encouraging the devotees to read Prabhupada's books. And it almost becomes like, well, I'll deal with these because they're just urgent. And that gets neglected.
Yeah. I mean, we've mentioned some things like reading clubs are a good thing, getting a devotee, because these are things that, depends on the environment, but having someone read maybe during prasadam time, you know, they read, everybody's listening, those kind of things. Book buddies, you know, having buddies that you connect with to, you know, where your that buddy or that friendship is based on reading. They're your book buddy, but that can interchange. You can change that around, you know, to try to get a bigger group involved and interchanging the different people to do that. So there's kind of different ways promoting reading whenever you're talking with devotees, promoting it, giving classes, all that kind of thing. But most of all, for me personally, my kind of main focus in other, for other things too, but certainly for reading Srila Prabhupada's books, is just to appreciate Srila Prabhupada, just glorify and appreciate Srila Prabhupada for all that he's achieved, all that he's done, including, as you say, arguably his most important project of all these books. And I think if people get some kind of attachment for Srila Prabhupada, it becomes very hard not to read, because you want to know what this person has given us and shared with us. So yeah.
Praghosa, I'll just come in, and maybe if I kind of try and rephrase that, as a leader, if I don't promote the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books, what have you tangibly seen could go wrong? Oh,
well, I can definitely answer that, because we are running out of time, so I'll be real quick. One thing, by the way, just to mention, Sutapa Prabhu, is that whenever I pick up one of Srila Prabhupada's books, I always switch my phone off. Always switch my phone off. You know, you've got to create some kind of proper atmosphere for reading, and having a phone beside you that's pinging every 2 minutes really is unhelpful. So that's also something that I would share with others. But in terms of things going wrong, I touched on it earlier, but I really think, I so much think this is a critical issue for the longevity and good health of ISKCON. We have got to have systematic courses, not just in philosophy, which we have with Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhava, etc. They are in place, but we've got to also have systematic training, etc. in place as to what Srila Prabhupada's mission was, why he took it up, why he did what he did, and how he saw his ISKCON, what the real foundations of it were, how it should be constructed, how it should be managed, you know, how all of those kind of things. We've got to have systematic courses that are based on his letters, based on his conversations, etc. I think that's so important. If we don't have, to some degree, you can make an argument that the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books isn't too bad, let's say. Let's put it like that. In other words, many people have at least read parts of the Bhagavad Gita, parts of the Bhagavatam, etc. But how many have actually read his conversations, read his letters and all that kind of stuff? I think that is a dwindling amount of devotees that are actually doing that. And if that continues to dwindle and gets to the point where no one's doing that, how can ISKCON continue? Certainly, how can it continue in the image of Srila Prabhupada if we're not aware of all that kind of stuff, how he started the movement, how he wanted it run and all of that? So that is a real and present danger, I think, for the longevity and health of ISKCON. People have got to understand the mission, what came before it and what came after it. I just think that's absolutely critical.
Thank you so much for raising that. It's such an important point when we talk about reading Prabhupada's books, but you talked about Prabhupada's conversations, his life story, his history, and the preservation of his very specific mood and mission and way in which he structured ISKCON, and preserving that for generations to come, which is the very heart of a leader's responsibility. Thank you. Jai Nitai Prabhu and Caitanya Vallabh, I'll also turn to you and just ask you to share with us, why is it so essential for a leader to ensure that they're giving all effort and emphasis to encouraging the devotees to read?
I'm just realizing we're almost out of time. And I just wondered if, like, I had before this written down some ideas of ways that we could inspire devotees to do it, and things that I had practically seen that seems to work. One of which is reading challenges, kind of like a book club. But we started during the lockdown with our mentorship group, just trying to read. I think we started with Nectar of Instruction, doing the be a sage page by page, 4 pages. No, we started with 2 pages a day, and we read the Nectar of Instruction in a month. And devotees were like, "Oh wow, we can read the whole book in a month. That was incredible." And they felt such a sense of accomplishment. Like, I read the whole book. Then we went on to Nectar of Devotion. We read Nectar of Devotion. From there, we did Science of Self-Realization. Then we read Prabhupada, Your Ever Well-Wisher. And actually, we've managed to read about 6 or 7 different books in a year and a half. And all the devotees are like, "Oh my God, I've read more books in the last year and a half than I have in my whole life in Krishna consciousness." So it's just like kind of creating these things. And the main thing is that we're doing it with them. And we have a WhatsApp group. We don't all read together. We read independently, but we have a WhatsApp group where we all share a little reflection after we read each day. It's short, not like we share here, like for 45 minutes, we share some, but like, really short snippets. I love this quote from Prabhupada. I like this statement. So that's one thing. I've got a whole list of things that I was thinking that we could do to possibly be calls to action for leaders that they could actually start to put in place. And I think it's a bit of a no-brainer why we need to read Srila Prabhupada's books. If we don't strengthen our intelligence of what the founder Acharya wanted, as Praghosa was saying, then what are we going to do? We're basically just, the mind will naturally speculate. So we need to make sure that we're connecting with clarity. What is the divine instruction coming from coming from Krishna through our founder Acharya, so that we know how to function and act within our society in general. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Caitanya Vallabh.
Thanks, Guru. Yeah, so your initial question was, if we've got 108 fires burning and we need to deal with all of them as a manager, and we don't think it's a priority to, encourage the devotees to read. So there was a little anecdote of a man who was trying to saw down a tree, and he had a rusty saw, and someone came along and said, it'd be a lot quicker if you just give me your saw, I'll take it back and I'll sharpen it for you, and then you'll be able to saw it down a lot quicker. And the man who was sawing the tree said, I've not got time. I've not got time to sharpen the saw. So the point is that, sometimes you need to take a little bit of time to make your instrument sharper. So if we're thinking, well, I don't have time, I've got so many things to do, I don't have time to inspire the devotees, then, the way of looking at it is, if the devotees are reading Prabhupada's books and they're more inspired, you won't have so many things to do, because you'll have people ringing you up and saying, hey, what needs to be done? They won't be waiting for you to say, hey, I need you to do this. They'll already be one step ahead of you, and you say, hey, can you clean this and that? They say, it's already done, and I've done this, that, and the next thing. So the point is, we want devotees who are inspired, who are enthused. And that needs to come not from them being reliant upon, again, like Candramauli Swami was saying, not just being reliant upon someone to come and inspire them. No, find out what that is inspiring them. And that will really come from reading and studying Srila Prabhupada's books. I like Jai Nitai Prabhu's point about saying we should do it with them. So, for instance, not everyone who's into it, it's important to see leaders themselves doing these things, not just do as I say, but do as I do. Prabhupada was so effective because he was Acharya, one who teaches by example, So I think that's really important, that, yes, we should understand that this is the most urgent thing to do. There's nothing more urgent than this, because if we do that, everyone will automatically be inspired. There'll be less things to do, and people will get their own inspiration. Krishna will inspire them from within to do more and more dynamic things. And anyway, listen, I know time is really of the essence now, so I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much. Today has been amazing. So many gems came out. I think we covered the 2 broad areas of giving some insights and inspiration as to how the individual members of the Krishna consciousness movement can catch the bug, get inspired, and develop their taste for reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And we also had a very good discussion on leaders and how leaders can ensure they make the time and they have the time and they're effective in inspiring the devotees under their care to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think if our viewers go back and review this conversation, they'll find many points which they can practically turn into tangible action points to try out in their yatras as soon as possible.
Can I just say that given the topic that we were discussing today, do I get a prize for what's behind this?
Yeah, I mean, look at all of those books behind you.
Have you read them? My books are not just meant for putting on a bookshelf. They're meant for reading.
We need you to come in a bit closer and make sure there's no plastic on them.
The question, Caitanya, should be how many times have I read them?
Okay. Very good.
Our thanks to all our wonderful leaders of the UK Yatra. They're a real inspiration. They're a real joy to serve with. And they're just such wonderful examples of dedicated servants of Srila Prabhupada who love to read Srila Prabhupada's books. And I thank you all for taking your time to be with us today. And I thank our viewers for tuning in. And let us all hope and pray that we can do Srila Prabhupada proud by mining his most important project, the Srimad Bhagavatam, for more and more jewels so we can enrich our lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruce. Glory to Srila Prabhupada. Glory to Srila Prabhupada's books. Hare Krishna.
Jai.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.